Okay, 5-2, interpreting the quadratic function or quadratic formula graphically. So we use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation. So let's look at how that relates to the graph. So the quadratic formula can be written to show two roots. So the first root, if we split it apart and we actually divide this out, and we split apart the negative b plus or minus 2a, or the negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and we make these two separate terms. Okay, how do these roots relate to the graph? So what is the first term? So the first term of each is negative b over 2a. Hopefully you remember back in time that x equals negative b over 2a was the axis of symmetry. So that first term in the solution, or in the roots, is the axis of symmetry. And then it says the second term of each root represents the distance the root lies from the axis of symmetry. Why is the second term in each root the same except for the sign? Well, if you think about an axis of symmetry and the distance to the answer, this distance should be the same, just in opposite directions, right? So we go the same distance if it's an axis of symmetry to get to the point on either side. The distance would be the same except for it's in opposite directions. So we're going in positive direction here and a negative direction there. So that's why when we see the plus that term and then minus that term, the plus is going to the right and the minus is going to the left. Okay. So consider this graphical representation to determine the real roots of the quadratic equation. We're going to do this step by step, and then you're going to try some on your own. So it says first thing, set y equal to 0. So 0 equals 2x squared minus x minus 15. And find a, which is 2, b, which is negative 1, and c, which is negative 15. So that's the first thing it asks you to do. Okay. Then it says identify the axis of symmetry and label that on the graph. So the axis of symmetry is x equals negative b over 2 times a. So in this case, it'd be negative or positive 1/4. So then that is the axis of symmetry. It says label on the graph. So we're going to write x equals 1/4 as my label. Okay, and it says label the point where it intersects the y on the graph as well. So that point would be 0. Sorry, not 0. I did it backwards. Sorry. 1/4 is the x, and y would be 0. Identify the distance from the axis of symmetry of the parabola along the y equals 0. So this is where we have to do the plus and minus b squared. So if we do the positive, the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a, and we solve that out. And these lines, I apologize, you can kind of ignore them. I could not erase them no matter what I did. So we have positive. If we plug in these numbers, b is negative 1 squared minus 4 times a times c, which is negative 15. And we simplify this, we get 1 plus the 620. So we get 121, the square root of 121 over 2 times a, which is 2, which would be 11 over 4. Okay, and so then we do the same thing with a negative b squared minus 4ac over 2a, and we just get negative 11 over 4. So same answers, opposite directions. Okay, so then it says identify the distance from the axis of symmetry of the parabola along the line. So we've got, this is x equals 1/4. We have the point at 1/4, 0. And we know we're going to go from this point to here. This distance is positive 11 over 4. And then on this side, the distance from there to there would be negative 11 over 4. So then it says identify the roots and label them on the graph. So if we have 1/4 as our axis of symmetry and we add 11/4, we end up with 12/4 or 3. So again, we're going to mark all this stuff. 1/4 here. If we're at here 1/4, 0, and we add 11/4, this new point is 3, 0. Okay, so we went up 11/4. And if we go down 11/4, so 1/4 minus 11/4, we'd be at negative 10/4, which is the same thing as negative 5 over 2 or negative 2.5. So then if we go down, we'd be at negative, so in our parentheses, negative 2.50. Okay, and that 1/4 should be directly in between them, as we said already. So that's how we can see, how does the quadratic formula relate to the graph? Well, the first part of the quadratic formula, the b squared over 2a is, or sorry, negative b over 2a is your axis of symmetry. And then the plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a, that whole part is your distance from the axis in either direction, and that will give you the roots. So the roots of this function are positive 3 and negative 2.5. So you have two problems just like this. On this page here, follow the same steps. Use the one I just did as an example. Make sure you label things on your graph and get the answer. And then you have a second one, same idea. Follow the steps, write all the work in here, label it on your graph, and get your answer. Okay, so once again, process of taking our quadratic or equation here and figuring out how to graph using the quadratic formula.